Good morning, everyone. My name is Jo Gilby, and I am the co-lead of BDO's Non-Executive Directors Programme. The webinar today is on AI and technology transformation, but as always, we're very interested in your opinions about subjects you'd like us to cover in the future. So if you do have any, please do let me know. We are going to take questions at the end of the webinar. And if you do have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A chat function that you'll see on your screen. We are going to be recording this session and we will send the recording out afterwards. So with all of that as a preamble, I'm going to hand over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Jo. My name is Dr. Tony Lanier. I'm one of the co-directors of the Sustainability ESG Hub here at BDO. I'm really delighted actually to speak to you about AI and technology. I too am a non-executive director for a company, a specific think tank around climate risk and nature positive and nature risk. I've been with BDO for about 21 months, and my expertise is around sustainable finance. So data is my bag, looking at how data can be used efficiently to make sure you make well-informed investment and business decisions specifically around sustainability type of data. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague Greg, who can entertain you around digital innovation.
Hi, my name is Greg Howe. I work at BDO in a particular discrete tax compliance and advisory team. My role here is to talk in general about how we have managed to apply generative AI for my particular business unit, working collaboratively with Dan Francis, who heads up the digital and innovation team within BDO. And hand over to the next person.
I'm Simon Thompson. I'm the head of data and AI at GFT Technologies. I'm going to join and talk about some AI case studies that we've been doing and how to make AI a bit of a success in your company.
Great. Thanks, Simon. I'm Dan Francis. I'm a Chief Innovation and Digital Officer at BDO, so working on the technology transformation, including all things AI. So I'm going to open up today. I'm going to take you through a few things, but first of all, just the main agenda that we want to cover today. So 4 main areas: really understanding the impact of AI and technology in general on your firm, on your company. Looking at risks and opportunities. I'm going to talk through some specific kind of points that you can take away for this. We're going to come on to some practical examples and some case studies. So best practice around AI, but also some real world examples from our guest speaker Simon and from Greg and from Tawny. But first, so next slide, please. First, just want to set the scene a little bit, not too much, because I appreciate you all may have seen some of these slides before, but it's important really to understand that AI is not new. It's been around actually for a long time. Humans have the ability really to normalize technology really quickly. We don't think of autopilot on a plane as AI, or even things like Google Maps and Alexa and things like that become just products that we use. Actually, they're very sophisticated AI models, and you'll see here that artificial intelligence actually is a very wide field of technology and of study and research. Generative AI has been around. Well, Google DeepMind really invented the sort of transformer model from sort of 2015, 2016 onwards, but really been as a field, and more importantly for you all listening, as a product in the last sort of 3 to 4 years or so. So next slide, please. And if we dive into generative AI, is that we're really seeing quite a rapid shift in products moving to what we call generative AI. Which is based on foundational models, and you may have heard of LLMs, large language models. These tend to be the text-based models that power products such as ChatGPT. So the point of this slide is really that when you think about examples like ChatGPT and some of the other examples, which I'll come on to in a second, you're really looking at really quite a sophisticated stack of technology. These are owned and really operated by some of the world's most valuable companies. So the trillion-dollar cap companies, Meta, Facebook, Google, Microsoft through their partnership with OpenAI, and Apple, and plenty of others. Actually, Amazon through Anthropic now are really dominating the world of generative AI, including providing the core technologies that it runs on. And also the Chinese entrants are providing competitive difference now. So if we move on to the next slide, I think it's important to remember that while ChatGPT has had a lot of headlines in the last sort of 18 months or so, it's really not just all about the text. And we're seeing that these products are really moving to increasingly different capabilities, and really moving to some very sophisticated pieces of technology. So you'll be familiar with ChatGPT, and it's important to remember that really only about 10% of the population, certainly in the UK, use it. So it's not mainstream or widespread adoption yet, but a lot of people will be using its capabilities through other products. And you'll see in the introduction of Microsoft Copilot and other generative AI, but mainly text-based solutions. However, if you've seen the output from products such as DALL-E or Sora or Whisper, which is more audio, these are now moving to image, video, audio, coding and translation, but also increasingly combinations of these, which is what we call multimodal. And the Google Gemini and the latest OpenAI models are all multimodal, which means they can cope with a variety of different inputs and outputs simultaneously. However, the real power and what we're seeing now, and this will be the transformational piece over the next decade, these will be the things that you and your boards will need to respond to, is the move from just generating output to automating things. So we call that agentic AI, or has it can be autonomous agents or autonomous AI agents, but this is moving from generating to doing. That means that you can automate people as well as just automating the output, and I'll come on into a couple of examples around that. And where software can automate, it can therefore also help with things like the physical items in the world. So robotics has been very fairly static for a number of decades, and we have very expensive robots in factories, custom built, custom code. The power of generative AI and the multimodal versions allow these robots to be increasingly powerful and lower cost. So we'll see the rise of AI taking a physical format as well as a software format. But to bring it to life, and this is probably well worth 2 minutes. This is Google's vision, or in fact, an example of their product range at the moment. So please play video.
Okay, let's do some tests. Tell me when you see something that makes sound.
I see a speaker, which makes sound.
What is that part of the speaker called?
That is the tweeter. It produces high-frequency sounds.
Give me a creative alliteration about these.
Creative crayons color cheerfully. They certainly craft colorful creations.
What does that part of the code do?
This code defines encryption and decryption functions. It seems to use AES-CBC encryption to encode and decode data based on a key and an initialization vector, IV.
That's right. What neighborhood do you think I'm in?
This appears to be the King's Cross area of London. It is known for its railway station and transportation connections.
Do you remember where you saw my glasses?
Yes, I do. Your glasses were on the desk near a red apple.
What can I add here to make this system faster?
Adding a cache between the server and database could improve speed.
What does this remind you of?
Schrodinger's cat.
All right, give me a band name for this duo.
Golden Stripes.
Nice. Thanks, Gemini.
Next slide, please. So I think you'll see if you can only take one example from that video and implement that in your sector or your organization or one of your companies, those could be incredibly powerful enablers. So I will just close out before I hand over just on some key points. So just take a couple of minutes to go through some of these. So these are really your action items. If you're not considering at least one of those at the board level, then I would certainly encourage you to inquire as to whether it is required or not. Active discussion at board level, I think, is enabled by making sure that you've got the right training actually throughout your organisation. But often boards are neglected, and we kind of assume that we all know what AI is and what the implications are. So I think it's important to make sure you do have the right support and training. And also make sure that when you mention generative AI or a new technology, that not just looking at CTO. So agree who is responsible at the board level for your AI strategy or embedding AI into your existing business strategy, which is a much better way of looking at things. There are new governance considerations around this. Obviously, I haven't got time to go into all of this today. But there are new standards, ISO 42001, which is very similar to 72001. But also making sure that you really apply to your existing board governance and your management structures and governance frameworks, risk governance frameworks, that you're looking at AI or the effect of AI on all of those, and making sure your teams that operate those have also the required skills to engage and understand with it. If they don't understand it, they're going to find it confusing and not necessarily engage as well as they could. Really make sure that your existing risks are updated. Often we find that generative AI, particularly as it's relatively new and influential, amplifies existing risks or maybe introduces output effects or amplifies output effects of existing risks in your register. And secondary effects can be an absolute corporate killer. We all know the stories of Kodak and IBM and many others. They failed to really consider the secondary effects in their marketplace. They addressed the primary concerns, such as developing new products, but failed to capitalize on the more powerful secondary effects that maybe take several years to take through, but ultimately killed the company. And there will be a lot to do around things like data protection, privacy, contracts, and so on. I would urge you all to consider, if you have any body of or any public body of knowledge, such as your website or a knowledge base that you, for example, sell or make available, or any large amount of IP in social media, you will almost certainly find it is currently being used in the current training models for OpenAI, ChatGPT, and others. So you have the ability to opt out, as many people are doing. Twitter, Reddit, and Wall Street Journal are all opting out of providing their public materials to future training models. But really consider whether that is for or against your business strategy. And have a look at really your legal and HR and all of your effectively legal frameworks. You'll have to consider the EU AI Act if you're transacting in that region, and probably the ones that will follow in the UK and other regions internationally as well. Think about when you need potential job descriptions and guidelines and policies. Do you need an AI policy, or do you need to update your existing acceptable use policies, for example? And when you have considered those first 5 points, then consider the impact on your products and services. Often people go to the products and service impact first. I think you need to get the structure right from the board level down. So on that point, I will pass over to Simon now to take us through the next stage. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much, Dan. Thank you. Okay, so I'll give some background. I work in a financial services consultancy. So if I could have the next slide, please. And there's a lot of excitement in our market about generative AI and AI in general. And it's quite different from the sort of excitement we had over the last 5-10 years. There's been a big trend to adopt AI into large enterprises for many years. But I think that the openness of generative AI, in the sense that people could just access it from a website or from various websites, was differentiating. In the past, we had something like IBM Watson, which you could observe doing things, but it was difficult to get your hands on it yourself and play with it and understand its power, or some of its power. And I think ChatGPT really, to the surprise of everybody, really did allow people to see something of the power of generative AI, possibly quite a deceptive view of that, but still something that was very powerful. We saw self-driving that was predicted to take over the world. There were predictions that by 2020, all cars would be self-driving, and it turned out no, because of regulation, because the problem was much more complicated than it first seemed. In the past, we had Deep Blue playing games, AI playing games. I think that the current wave really is more compelling because it's much more focused on real world issues, and the kind of issues that we're seeing are things like real-time translation and transcription. Many video conferencing products, for instance, allow transcriptions from normal audio, image extraction and labeling. So, for instance, you can pick up a table from Excel or from the web with data in it and pop it into Excel, and Excel will extract the data from it, from the image of a table, and you can then process the data within the table, which is quite something. AlphaFold, it's now AlphaFold 3, in fact, is a great high-impact application in science, which predicts with record-breaking accuracy the shape of proteins. DeepMind, who built AlphaFold, they've also built a generative weather model, which beats state-of-the-art computational models, strictly computational models. And these are again part of the new wave of machine learning that is striking us. So I think everybody is seeing impact, and we're implementing real products, real projects in investment banks that use this technology. Next slide, please. Okay, but everybody, I think, has become pretty clear about what could go wrong, and as non-executive directors, you have to be aware of these issues. Air Canada has lost a big court case about offering one of its generative AI chatbots, offering products that turned out to be invalid, and the court held that, in fact, the Air Canada had to honour those offers. That it didn't help Air Canada that it did this in the context of somebody's bereavement. So this is quite an impactful PR story as well. DPD put up a bot, and customers immediately taught it to swear and make up rude songs about DPD, which again was a pretty significant PR bomb. And then there was a car dealer, Chevrolet dealer in the States, and a customer persuaded that chatbot to sell it a 2024 car for $1. As you can see, the chatbot then announced that it's a legally binding offer with no takesy backsies that it had made. I don't think that the dealer actually did end up honouring that bargain, but it's very illustrative of the dangers that these technologies could expose you to. Please may I have the next slide? But what could go right? So this is from Erik Brynjolfsson's team at MIT. There's a paper that they've put out on the archive server, and it's a pretty convincing case study of the kind of impact that a generative AI system can have on a customer service scenario. And here you can see that the lavender color graphs show significant uplifts in resolution per hour, a drop in average call handling time, an uplift in the number of chats per hour, a lift in the resolution rate for complaints, and a lift or at least equaling of customer satisfaction. So this is a pretty compelling set of data for people looking at running their organization. Introducing generative AI in this scenario for these companies proved to be productive. And that's what's on the table. So next slide, please. But as I say, we've got these key issues. LLMs, the current generation of AI, they hallucinate, they make stuff up. They can be manipulated by customers. They can be tricked into doing things. They're pretty naive. And a technical issue with them also is they compound errors. And this is irreducible. In fact, you can't make a modern neural network not do this. Basically, because of their structure, if a small error creeps into the calculations of the network, it will compound up to the top into a bigger error. And this prevents them from doing all sorts of things like properly planning or reasoning about things or doing calculations even. But luckily we have old-fashioned computer systems to do some of those things. So next slide, please. And the benefits that are on the table, well, what we do know about these systems is that they're very good at natural language processing. So that is something that we've struggled with in AI for many years. And now we do have a much stronger solution in the form of a large language model. And they also provide approximate common sense knowledge. And by that, we mean you can ask them particular questions about the real world. And because they've been trained in the way they've been trained on so much information, the structure can produce approximately the right readout of knowledge that you can then use in your interaction with a customer. Next slide, please. Okay. And we can adopt technical solutions, deliberate solutions to some of the challenges. So specifically, we can implement two technical fixes. One fix we can do is that we can partition off the functionality of the system into small modules and prevent information leaking from the customer into the retrieval networks and prevent poisoning in that way. And we can also verify the information that's generated by the large language model, presented by the large language model, by generating it by normal computational means. And if we adopt that, next slide, please, then we can create these kind of applications. So this is an application, a demonstration we built that can provide the sort of functionality in a real retail banking scenario that we would like for customers. So obviously just natural language interactions, which can be more comfortable for some customers in some scenarios, but also we can exploit the common sense knowledge to do things like dig out that if I ask about how much I'm spending on coffee, I mean that this is a query about coffee shops or cafes, and therefore, if the bot retrieves information on those categories of merchants, then that's the right data to use in its calculations and presentations to me. Okay, next slide, please. Practical considerations about this to bear in mind. One thing that we see when people embark in these projects, they're very, very exciting, but people don't think about the pounds, shillings, and pence. So it is an expensive game. These are not for free. The technology is evolving rather fast, and there may be ways to reduce the costs using smaller models than the large ones. But in order to develop a high integrity system, you do need a sophisticated infrastructure, and building that and running it and maintaining it is a very large overhead, in fact. Next slide, please. So just to sum up, the compromises, you can't just have something like ChatGPT and say, this is going to work in my business and provide services. You have to adapt it within a system which provides some very sharp constraints on what it can do. So you can't allow it to have a conversation because the conversation can poison it. You have to regulate the kind of responses it makes because you can't anticipate what will be done with open intents. And you have to offload some of the load from it, from the large language model, into things like normal calculation systems to avoid these compounding error problems. Next slide, please. Okay, and underpinning this, I'm sorry about the image is a bit fuzzy here. Underpinning this is always you need to have a strong infrastructure around your AI efforts. So the AI is like the jam in a sandwich, okay? The two pieces of bread, you need a performant data infrastructure, which allows you to have high quality data and data quality. What we mean is we know where it came from, how we can use it, where it's got to go, what its life cycle is going to be. So we have it under control. And that's really fundamentally the basis of being able to control your AI. And you can support it then with a proper governance system and a model management process that allows you to be accountable for what it does. And that's genuine governance in the sense of you have real control and real ability to respond in problem situations. And to get value out of all of this, you need proper user engagement and benefit management processes over the top. Next step, please. Next slide, please. Okay. And moving forward, what we think we're going to see in the past, AI was the alchemist's work, very like pre-World War I fighter planes or World War I fighter planes, very, very much not for civilians. Your life, you were taking your life in your hands using them. Sometimes they had spectacular results, but sometimes literally the wings would come off. At the moment, we're in a sort of hinterland where we have powerful technology that's in widespread use or going into widespread use. My fear is that we're going to see things a little bit like the Hindenburg disaster. And what happened there was a big accident, a big problem. The interpretation that was put on it at the time was that the hydrogen in the airship had exploded when there was a lightning strike. And that meant that airships essentially went off the table as vehicles for a long, long time. They got outmoded. They're not really economical now. But they got outmoded really because people said, well, look, we won't go in ones that are filled with hydrogen. We'll only go in ones that are filled with helium. And helium's incredibly expensive. And hydrogen is cheap, but helium's very expensive. They both work the same. Wouldn't use hydrogen. It turns out that the reason why the Hindenburg blew up was because it was painted with aluminium paint, white aluminium paint. And that's what actually went on fire. But people only figured this out in about 1970. And the reason they were able to figure it out then was because there was an infrastructure of understanding aircraft that had evolved over 50, 60 years. And it allowed the adoption and use of things like jetliners. And there's the de Havilland Comet. Famously, 3 comets disappeared in short order at one point. They basically suffered catastrophic accidents. The infrastructure of aerospace swung into action and investigated what had happened and made discoveries about the properties of aluminium that were unknown and changed how aircraft were designed after that. And this allowed civil aviation to continue. And it ultimately was what actually figured out what went wrong with the Hindenburg, but 50 years too late. So this is the lesson for me, is we need to evolve this infrastructure of capability in order to proceed with AI. And that's what every company needs to do. Next slide, please. And if we do that, I think we can have a positive outcome where AI works, people are confident using it. We can deal with problems as they arise. We can fix them quickly and promptly. And this could lead to massive economic growth and many productive new jobs. If we don't do this, then I would see AI as becoming much more untrusted and really not being used to solve the huge societal issues that we face right now. Final slide, please. And fundamentally, what we need to do is we need to build in our organizations and more widely a trustworthy system around AI so that people understand what they're transacting with. We have a proper governance process and mechanism to support that and maintain that transactional trust, and a culture around AI that reinforces it at all times. Okay, so that's my point of view, and I hope it was useful. And I better wrap up and hand on to, I think, Dan. Is that right?
No, me, Simon.
Oh, Tony. Okay, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. You know, what I appreciate about Simon a lot is that he kind of brings everything to life. He puts color where things were black and white. So, and I think he did an excellent job there. I'm an NED myself of a company. And as you can tell, I'm also a North American. I come from the United States. And with those two things in mind, I've been really watching the growth of AI in Europe and in North America, specifically in my area, my little beat, which is sustainability and ESG, around climate change, around nature, and DEI. Now, as an NED, I understand the luxury that is afforded to NEDs, that they have to look for trends, they have to use in the aid of assessing growth strategies, risk assessments, etc. But my focus is on sustainability, ESG. I'm sure that you've heard it before. It is a trend probably that you've heard it before that requires capabilities and experience. But it's also something that can help out with growth. It can also help out with risk assessment. So when we talk about AI within the context of ESG and sustainability, most of the headlines you see are that AI can make things better. Not what it might destroy along the way. And actually, it turns out that there's some very important things at stake here, and that is environment, nature, biodiversity. So as the tech ramps up, there's some concerning data has actually emerged around AI specifically. One is, and these are just 4 examples. I'm sure that there's a multitude of other ones, but you as an NED, being aware of what's out there, being aware of the risks that are involved when it comes to AI, is incredibly helpful. So I'm going to talk about some of the negatives, but I also want to touch just very shortly actually on some of the positives that AI can actually bring to bear. So some of the negatives is that Google new AI uses about 10 times the amount of power as traditional Google searches. And just adding an AI snapshot to any of your Google searches could use the same amount of electricity needed to power all of Ireland. Using AI to generate a single image can gobble up as much energy as fully charging your smartphone. And the global data centers that add power to AI platforms accounts for about 2.5% to 3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, surpassing even the aviation industry. With that aside, energy, everyone knows about that. But the little known fact is also AI uses a lot of water. And actually, it's going to hit about 6.6 billion cubic meters by 2027. In 2018, before AI kind of ramped up, Google alone was alone responsible for using 15.8 billion liters of water to cool its data centers. Can you imagine? It's just exponential there. But the Electric Power Research Institute predicts that AI will use as much as 9.1% of the country's energy by 2030. So even though AI, there's a lot to be said about AI that was brought to life, what Simon talked about, it behooves you as an NED also to understand what are some of the downsides of using AI. Everyone talks about hallucinations, but there is a real world impact of AI in the environment and in nature, etc. So since the AI explosion, it's still new. The organizations like the U.S. Energy Information Administration are not tracking data centers. So that's something that we here in the UK and also in the United States need to be cognizant of how is AI impacting energy, a lot more granular. Plus, corporations like Shell are working to accelerate AI developments, knowing it would lead to further fossil fuel use. So there's a backdoor agenda there. Yet, as I said, those are kind of the downsides to AI, especially of the tangible things around environment and water and biodiversity. But there is very much some good things that are happening. Actually, there are some AI startups that are using AI and the environment to preserve the world's oceans, monitor emissions, manage recycling, monitor and manage biodiversity and the use of nature, etc. So let's not forget that AI has a lot to offer when it comes to the positive things around strategy, growth, what you as NEDs need to be focusing on. But it's also something that all of the risks need to be incorporated when it comes to AI. So my message to you is AI is a double-edged sword. There's definitely negatives, but there's also positive. And these positives can significantly buoy the growth plans of your organizations, can also help with development of strategies, etc. We just recently, there's been a lot of big deals around AI, looking to buy into the data aspect of AI. But it's not a silver bullet against climate change, but it's something that can be used to help facilitate the transition toward net zero or decarbonization, and the more efficient use of nature in order to buoy conservation, adaptation, and mitigation. So with that, I'd like to hand over to my colleague, actually to give us a little bit more flavor around the digital side of things. So Greg, if you'd be so kind as to take it away.
Hi, thanks, Tony. So my name is Greg. Very excited to be part of this conversation. So my part in this chat is to discuss a practical application of using generative AI within a business and within my team. So really, my story starts with a curiosity in this space. So I'm not a technical person. I don't have a background in technology or in AI, but I could see how tech was changing the landscape in my particular business unit. And I really wanted to be involved. Tech promised some amazing outcomes, new customer experiences, scale, efficiencies, those sorts of things. But there was some uncertainty in how to empower teams to deliver those new tech-enabled solutions. So I met Dan, who spoke earlier, in 2019 or 2020, I think it was. Dan had just come to BDO, and he was building out his digital and innovation team, which was designed to actually empower business teams across our business to adopt these solutions. So I worked collaboratively with Dan and his team on a few projects successfully, and that really inspired me to go to my boss within my business team and say, well, I'm looking to really focus on this area. Can I become a tech lead role within my business team? This was sort of unprecedented at the time, but the idea was if I was in that role, then I could sort of promote the adoption of tech-enabled service delivery, empower the team to use these new tools and technologies. And at a personal level, it really gave me the opportunity to broaden my skill set and become a leader in this space. So how did we achieve success? Well, really, it all revolved around incentives. My new role as the tech lead in my business team gave the team an incentive to adopt tech-enabled solutions, and a personal incentive for me. It was part of my objectives. In fact, it was the core part of my own personal performance objectives. We also had to think about cultural shift. So I work at BDO. It's an accounting firm. We are obviously really risk averse. That we have to, we're a regulated firm. There's a lot of quality and risk issues that we have to consider. But in this space, in terms of adopting technology, we really needed to embrace things like failure. Failure meant that we were progressing. Failure meant that we were learning things. So cultural shift in that space was really important. The other thing that we looked at is communication. There was a bit around change management. Adoption of these new technologies meant that the way we did business before was going to change quite dramatically to the way we were going to do business moving forward. A lot in our team had some concerns about what that meant for their jobs in terms of the short and long term. But we were actually pretty successful in rolling this out. And when I get onto Personas, which is our generative AI solution, we were actually in the position where we could only release the licenses piecemeal, and those that had licenses were really coveted. They were having a great time, and they could focus on some really interesting parts of the job rather than the administrative stuff that we were able to solve with our solution. There were also some quality, risk, and governance pieces that we had to consider. Obviously, you have the central stuff, which Dan's team was involved with, but even at the business team level, you know, these solutions meant that we had to think about process around how we quality and risk processes around this new technology, and I can go into some of that at the question period at the end. Right, next slide, please. So, personas. What is personas? So, personas is our generative AI solution at BDO, which has proved extremely successful. And it was a successful collaboration between Dan's central team and my business team for my particular use case. So Personas is a data secure ChatGPT, which allows us to derive proprietary data insights in a secure BDO environment. It helps us in terms of how we develop this. As I said, it's a collaboration between my team and Dan's team. So Dan's team was involved in the nuts and bolts, the development, the solution design, the developers building this. And my team was involved in how do we distill our business expertise through a prompt engineering process to properly query the model and get best outcomes. So how did this all start? Well, it started in 2022 when ChatGPT first dropped. I immediately saw the potential benefits for my business use case. I worked collaboratively with Dan to deliver this solution, the Persona solution for my business unit. So how do we use personas? Three broad areas that I've touched on there. So customer conversations, a big part of my job is to talk to my customers about new and interesting topics. And Personas gives me the ability to query these topics and come up with some interesting ideas to stress test with my customers and clients. Report generation. So if you think about what a lot of business teams within BDO do, we consult with our clients. So what does that involve? That involves talking to our clients, gathering information, reviewing that information, and ultimately preparing a report at the end of it with the outcomes of that due diligence. And this is where we really found some amazing efficiencies with Personas. We were able to use Personas to distill this information and generate first drafts of reports that we could then refine for our customers. The final use case is articles and business development. So if you go online, you will find a generative AI thought leadership article that BDO prepared. So really that wouldn't have been possible in the time period that we developed that without Personas. It allowed us to really create a framework for this thought leadership article and go into great detail in various aspects. There was still some work that we had to do in knitting it all together, but Personas was really a fundamental part of pulling that thought leadership article together. Outcomes and learnings. So I just mentioned the efficiencies that we were able to achieve with Personas. You know, just being able to prepare that first draft of a report, it saved us an enormous amount of time. Job satisfaction, I mentioned earlier. Our team now, rather than involving themselves in some of the really admin-y type work of preparing that first draft of a report, we could have that first draft prepared, and then we could focus on adding value in the areas that our clients appreciated. And then a big piece to this in terms of learnings is risks. We mentioned earlier about hallucinations. We've had to adopt some processes and how we control these new risks around generative AI generated reports. That's really it. I can talk through some of the specifics in the Q&A section, but I think for my role, that's it.
Right, thanks, Greg, and thanks to all our speakers and our guest speaker, Simon. We have time now for questions. So we have a good 10, 12 minutes or so. I will ask some questions of our panelists here, but I'd really like to hear from you as to your questions. So you have a Q&A button that's available to you. So please drop in the questions into the Q&A, and we'll do our best to answer them. While you're having a think about what you would like to ask, because this is your time with us, I will open up with one question for our panel while you all get typing, if that's okay. Simon, could I start with you, if that's okay? And if I could ask our panelists to put their cameras on for this section. Just really, you touched on some of these emerging technologies. Is there any particular areas you'd like to expand on in terms of what NEDs should be keeping an eye on in terms of future technologies, particularly around generative AI?
Okay, so seeing the future in this space is really difficult. Okay, because things have been disrupted in the last 5 years. Have been big technology shifts. So I think anybody who's got any sense would say, look, we just can't see the future. Interesting stuff is happening. The space is evolving. I would say that we're seeing somewhat of a flattening of the capabilities of the large language models. So we're running into a situation where getting the right data for them is now harder and harder, and the compute is more and more expensive. So that people have invested. Really, what happened 5 years ago, people just invested an enormous amount in training these models that nobody expected would be invested. Nobody thought somebody would invest $10 million to train a model. Now they're investing $250 million to train some of these models. It's just surreal. So we're seeing that exponential flatten now. I would say that people should be looking out for more economical models, smaller models, distilled models, and also specialized models that meet particular domain requirements. But I would also say I can't see the future, and it's an exciting time to be involved in AI.
Great, thank you, Simon. I think particularly the trend towards more specialized models that have lower compute cost is a big trend that we're seeing, particularly in the larger companies. People taking advantage of those. I'll move to some of the questions in the chats. So let's have a look. Well, Greg, we heard from you, but earlier, but you can probably elaborate a little bit on what exactly you use personas for in terms of something tangible, and please feel free to talk about your area of speciality, because I think it's a great example.
Yeah, so I don't want to get the risk of getting too granular into what I do. So I work in the R&D tax relief group within BDO. So we help clients prepare and submit R&D tax credit claims. And part of that requirement is for us to gather due diligence and gather information as to why these projects meet the definition of R&D. And so we use personas to, and remember, personas is secure with client data. So we're able to use client data securely within BDO and generate first drafts of these narratives, which we use to support R&D claims. So in terms of how it works, if you've ever used ChatGPT, you will understand what that user interface is very similar to how personas works. So you can attach information, you can drop information into a chatbot, you can upload documents, and then you can query it with the relevant prompts depending on what the particular use case is. It's very it's actually pretty holistic. So it's not just applicable to my team, but a broad range of teams within BDO, and it's been specifically built in that way. Is that fair, Dan?
Yeah, perfect. And I'll thank you, Greg. And just to add on to I think there are a couple of other follow-up questions from a technology perspective. Now, absolutely uses OpenAI services provided by Microsoft through Azure, but also we use proprietary grounding techniques to ensure the output is grounded in fact and our knowledge bases. So a little bit of kind of technical footnote to our implementation of personas, but I'm sure many other large companies are doing very similar exercises across, and we often see parallels with other people trying to solve these types of technologies. And Simon talked very briefly around the techniques that enable you to get more certainty around what is inherently a predictive technology. And a footnote, actually, you asked about Microsoft Copilot. Yeah, we are looking at Copilot across our global footprint. We have a global relationship with Microsoft, both in terms of selling Microsoft services, but also consuming them. So absolutely, we're looking at all of the Microsoft generative AI technologies, including Copilot for M365 and the other applications. Now I'm going to throw one open to our panel, because there's one here around credit risk assessment, including affordability. I have a small answer based on my insight, but I don't know if Simon or Greg or Tawny have any knowledge of this particular area around credit risk assessment.
I've implemented credit risk solutions using AI. So obviously there are big problems with regulation in some aspects of this, because you have to be very careful about protected characteristics as one issue, and that can be a very convoluted and problematic issue. Where we've seen a lot of success is in data verification, entity matching. In investment banks, we see very complicated ownership structures as part of the picture of credit risk allocation. And we've had a lot of success implementing verification and support for entity resolution within those structures. So there is a lot of opportunity in credit risk assessment, but like many applications, you've got a very complex business process, a very complex regulatory picture there, and that's for good reasons, and therefore the recipe for success is to have a very well identified, well understood specific business problem within the process that you can resolve with AI. And I would make a point, where we've had success, it's because the business problem that's been resolved has been tied to the organizational strategy. So I would say you often see people coming forward with a business problem where there's a nominal saving that looks impressive, and somehow it never makes a difference. But where the business problem is linked to some sort of strategic goal, that's where we see really massive impacts. And in the credit risk case, what I've seen is being able to reduce the cycle time on the assessments process has enabled some organizations to close out business much more quickly, and that's allowed them to play into their revenue generation strategy, and that's where the application has been successful. Okay, so that's what I've done.
Brilliant, it's a fantastic example. And we're seeing, I think, AI permeate a lot of these decision and judgment areas of organizations, which is a very interesting area. Tawny, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. There is a question here around bias and the danger of bias within generative AI. I think you touched on some of these points around data, but do you have a view on the kinds of risks that this poses to organizations that would like to use AI or generative AI?
Well, when it comes to sustainability, one of the biggest issues around being informed around sustainability and ESG challenges is the data requirement that's needed to make well-informed decisions. And the problem is that AI is just not quite there yet, because we do talk about actual numbers when it comes to emissions, for instance, their numbers. And I don't think that AI is quite there yet to look at just pure numbers. It is like LLMs. It's about looking at language for trends, for patterns. But one of the bigger challenges is the context of where this all comes from. So it's getting better, of course, and we saw some examples today. But I think when it comes to in the sustainability and ESG side of things, it's the hope is that as the technology actually advances and gets more sophisticated, then it can be used for more forecasting and looking at data in a more comprehensive, given its context. We still have problems with context right now with data that's even just scraped or just delivered via Excel spreadsheets and no AI involved at all. So it's getting our head around how is the data being used? How is it? How do the trends actually evolve, et cetera, within the context of a ESG and sustainability? So my expertise is just around that small element, and I'm sure that there's much broader elements, Dan, that could be touched on as well.
Yeah, bias is a fascinating area and it's probably worthy of a whole hour. My favorite example, I mean, there are 500 types of bias apparently in the world, but my favorite one is the IKEA bias, which is the bias that you are more likely to hold on to things that you have made yourself. Which is probably the least practical one, but actually one you do see in organisations. I'm definitely guilty of that myself. So, there is a question here which I might ask Simon to have a look at around the car dealer bot, which is a fantastic example, the $1 example. So the question is, in the future, can something like this be solved by AI validating its own output?
Right. So I'm always very suspicious when people say, okay, it validates itself, or we get another model to validate it, because to me, I believe in this thing I like to call information physics, where you have to have some energy into the system to add information into a problem solver, and just saying, okay, we'll do the same thing twice doesn't really cut it for me. Of course, again, could be proved wrong at any moment, but I tend to not like the idea of models validating models. I think looking at constrained situations, it is possible to formally verify things, right? You can, or semi-formally at least, verify, are the numbers in an output the numbers that are expected in this particular context. But I think it is in the limit an open question at the minute. Nobody really knows how to bottom out these things. And the full answer is, if you are willing to be accountable and liable for what the thing says, then it's okay. If you're that confident, it's okay. If you're not that confident and you don't fancy being in court, backing it up, then you better turn it off. and that's what it comes down to. And in some situations, this is absolutely fine. There are a lot of things where you don't need to be too worried. An internal knowledge engine or something like that, it can be fine, right? You can think through the scenarios and it can be fine. When you're doing something more business critical, then you need to think more carefully. You need to understand the scenarios. You need to understand the ramifications, the consequences, and understand, are you willing to stand behind what's being done?
Yeah, I think, Simon, it's a really powerful point. I think all of the people on this call this webinar should consider really where is the best use of generative AI in their organisation. And often it's a combination of different technologies. Greg and I have actually worked on different types of AI, so not using generative AI, using things like symbolic AI, which are grounded in fact and knowledge graphs, and therefore are evidenceable and auditable and transparent. And actually, you're seeing some of these types of technologies now being used in combination with generative AI, which is largely predictive and based on data. So often combinations of technologies are really powerful together. So I would encourage boards to be looking at a range of technologies and not charging head on towards just generative AI. I think that that will certainly de-risk your approach. I'll just cover one final question around. There's the presentation alludes to the high cost of implementation. Does this mean that AI is out of the reach of large and multinational companies, and are SMEs priced out at the moment? Simon, maybe just your thoughts, and then I'll have I'll do a quick roundup, and we'll close out.
So I think if you're buying in from a supplier, from a SaaS supplier, a specific application that's AI enabled, then that supplier will have made the investment, and they can return on that because they've got 50, 60, 100 customers or something like that. So I think that's where SMEs can get value out of AI in an economically sustainable way. I think that if you're building things bespoke yourself, you've got to be very careful. You've just got to apply the business case rigor that you would for anything, right? And the numbers can be quite large quite quickly, because you're talking about employing engineers for considerable periods of time to do things that really work, okay? To make a demo is very easy. To take a demo to a prototype, 10 times that cost. To take the prototype to proof of concept prototype, 10 times more. Take a prototype to production, 10 times more. So you can very easily go from 3 guys, do something in a week. It's cool. We all love it. Suddenly it's a 2-year project to deliver the thing, right? And you just can't afford it. So be very careful of embarking on that road. Instead, look for suppliers who can deliver value immediately, that's defined, that you can scratch with something hard, can scratch a window with it. That's my advice, unless you're an investment bank, in which case you can do loads of stuff.
Fantastic advice. Thank you, Simon. I'm sure people can get in touch with you if they think that your company can help you on that journey. And the same, obviously, for
they could buy my book on Amazon as well.
Oh, there you go. Maybe we'll drop a link into the into the chat. Thank you very much to you, Simon, for being our guest speaker. Thank you, Tawny, for keeping us grounded on the very real and present danger around the environmental concerns, and Greg for making it real in terms of actual people in our businesses using this type of technology. From me, Dan Francis, I'll close out and thank you all for attending. Thank you and goodbye.